2 more minutes for everyone to get here. So in the meantime, we'll invite you to introduce yourself in the chat if you would like. Let us know where you're coming in from. Always love to see all the different places that people are representing. All right, Northern Kentucky, Spokane. Boston, awesome. Virginia, Rhode Island, Seattle. Love it. All right, we definitely got both East and West Coast and the center of the country represented. Love it. Canada, Michigan. Very cool. All right, well, my clock just hit 9:30 here on the West Coast, so we're going to go ahead and get started so we have the most time for our presenters. So hello again. Thank you for joining us for the first session of the last day of Calm 2026, both hooray and sad. I'm Danny Cook. I'm going to be moderating this session today. I'm so glad to welcome Lisa, Helen, and Tiffany to present today on Leadership Without Apology, Women in Library Management. They'll go ahead and start their presentation in just a moment, but we're going to go over a few logistical items first. So firstly, this session is being recorded, and you are able to access captions on the bottom of your Zoom screen by pressing the CC button. If you have questions as the presentation goes along, please do add those to the Q&A feature in Zoom webinar. That allows us to see them all, your colleagues to upvote the ones that they want to see answered first. And then, of course, the chat is a great place to share resources, give your feedback, your experiences as we go through the presentation as well. And I know there's also interaction in this presentation that you'll get to participate in. Billy is here from the tech committee to make sure that all of the technology works. Thank you so much, Billy. And Billy is also dropping links into the chat about all of the different pieces to our program today, including our collaborative resource sharing and our code of conduct. And Heather is here to help us make sure that the code of conduct is followed. So with that, I'm going to wish you a great presentation, and I'll turn it over to the team. Oh, Lisa, I think you are muted.
I realized it as soon as I started talking. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon and good morning. If you would just take a minute, can you see my Menti slide? Please go ahead and answer that. We're just checking in with you. We won't be able to answer all of your, address all of your issues today, but we're going to see how many of these we can hit. So what is your biggest challenge as a supervisor or manager? Just take a minute there and
we've also dropped the link in the chat if that's easier for you to access as well.
wonder if is it working?
Lisa, you may have to refresh. It's working on our end, but
Okay,
maybe
thank
not
you.
there.
Okay, let me see. There we go. Thank you. All right, let's see what we got going here. So having all the answers, ooh, being too nice. We're going to try to hit on that. oh, sorry, some imposter syndrome. I don't know if I can roll down on when I have it embedded. See, I haven't done that enough to know. Pulled in many directions, heavy workload. All right, well, hopefully you can all see each other's slides. I'm going to go ahead and roll us into the first slide. All right.
So I think that's me, right? Welcome again, everyone. We are so excited to share our session, Leadership Without Apology, Women in Library Management. My name is Tiffney-Gipson Goodwin, and I'm the director for the Medical Center Library. Today, I have the pleasure of co-presenting with my colleagues, Lisa Nichols, the director of the Education Library, and then also Helen Bischoff, coordinator of Liaison Services. All of us hail from the University of Kentucky Libraries in Lexington, Kentucky. And with our powers combined, we have about 20 plus years of leadership and management experience in academic libraries. Today, we'll explore how women leaders show up authentically, navigate perceptions, and lead with impact in academic libraries. So we go to our next slide. Our agenda covers 3 core areas today. So we'll start with talking about authentic leadership. We'll discuss how women's presence and perception shape their influence. Then we'll move to leading difficult conversations, where we'll share practical tips and a case study for handling challenging discussions. And then we'll close out by talking about mentoring, team building, and morale, where we'll discuss strategies for building trust and collaboration. Let's go to our next slide, please. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about authentic leadership. So authenticity is more than a buzzword, right? It's about leading in ways that align with your values, your personality, and professional context. For women, authentic leadership often means navigating expectations and showing up with clarity and confidence. Let's move to that next slide. We'll talk a little bit about perception, presence, and power. So as a woman in library leadership, I've learned that perception is the most critical factor shaping my effectiveness and my influence. While presence and power are essential, perception is the lens through which all leadership actions are interpreted. It's like the starting point, right? So before I even speak or make a decision, others are forming judgments based on how I show up, maybe my tone, or maybe even my body language. In my personal experience, perception determines whether my presence is seen as credible and whether my power is recognized or questioned. For women leaders, perception is often shaped by societal expectations and unconscious biases. That's why I rank perception as the most important element here. So if perception is positive and aligned with my intentions, it amplifies my presence and my power. But on the other hand, if perception is negative or biased, it can undermine my authority, even when my competence and professionalism are very strong. Let's look at the next slide. Talk a little bit about why perception matters. So leadership is fundamentally relational. It's not just about what we do, but also about how others interpret our actions. Authority is socially constructed, meaning the power we hold is shaped by how others perceive us, not just by our credentials or our titles. Perception often precedes performance. So for women leaders, this is especially true. Research shows that women's leadership behaviors are scrutinized more closely, and the same actions can be interpreted differently depending on who demonstrates them. So authentic leadership means being aware of these dynamics and intentionally shaping perception through consistent, value-driven actions. It's not about performing for others, but more about understanding the landscape and leading with clarity and confidence. Let's move to the next slide, please. Leadership is not evaluated equally. Identical behaviors are often interpreted differently based on gender. For instance, assertiveness in men is typically seen as confidence, while in women, this can be labeled as being abrasive or aggressive. This double standard affects leadership presence and authority, creating barriers that women must navigate. Role congruity theory and lack of fit models developed by Ugly and Carew in 2002 and Howman in 2012 explain these patterns. As a woman in leadership, I've personally experienced moments where direct communication was misinterpreted, and I had to adjust my approach to ensure that my voice was being heard and respected. Understanding these dynamics help us strategize and lead with greater clarity and impact. Let's move to our next slide. We'll talk about some common double binds for women leaders. So women leaders often face double binds, which are contradictory expectations that make it difficult to satisfy all stakeholders involved. So some common examples of those double binds are competence versus being likable. So if you're highly competent, you may be seen as less likable. Another one is one we just talked about, being assertive versus being aggressive. Assertiveness can be praised in men, but it can also be criticized in women. And another example, being collaborative versus being weak. Collaboration is often valued, but too much collaboration can make you seem like you're indecisive. What about the example of confidence versus arrogance? So confidence in a male leader may be interpreted as arrogance in a female leader. And then there's the example of being emotional versus being detached. Showing emotion can reinforce stereotypes, while suppressing it can make you seem a little cold. And then there's authentic being versus being professional. Authenticity is encouraged, but only when it aligns with dominant norms. And these bonds are structural, not personal, and require constant self-monitoring. Naming them reduces self-blame and normalizes shared experiences. And research by Catalyst and Ugly and Carley in 2007 also support these findings. Let's move to the next slide. Authenticity is not the opposite of professionalism. So authentic leadership means integrating your genuine self into professional conduct. Professionalism isn't personality free. It's about channeling your personality constructively and appropriately for the context. So when values and action align, trust can actually deepen and influence can grow. Authenticity fosters genuine connections and inspires trust, while professionalism ensures a respectful, productive environment. Bill George and colleagues in 2007 emphasized that authenticity is rooted in values, self-awareness, and consistency, not unfiltered expression. So for women leaders, the goal is to lead in ways that are true to who we are, while still being effective and respected within our organizational context. Let's go to the next slide. Showing up authentically. So trusted, professional, and aligned leadership fosters positive team dynamics. Authenticity means genuine self-expression, while boundaries ensure professional respect and limits. Consistent, value-driven leadership builds trust and strengthens teams. Research shows that trust is built not through likability alone, but through predictability, fairness, and clarity. So for many women in library management, authenticity shows up as value-driven leadership, like explaining the why behind why decisions are made, maybe even communicating expectations clearly, and then also aligning actions with stated priorities. It also shows up through boundaries, knowing when to collaborate and when decisiveness is required. Authentic leadership is not about being liked by everyone, it's more about being trusted. Let's move to the next slide. Credibility, authority, and voice. So perception directly influences credibility, authority, and whose voice is heard. Studies on workplace communication show that women are more likely to be interrupted, talked over, or have their ideas attributed to others. Victoria Bresco in 2016 found that women expressing strong emotion in professional settings are judged more harshly than men expressing those same emotions. Over time, these patterns can subtly erode at authority, not because of leadership ability, but because of how behavior is interpreted. Many women leaders internalize these experiences, questioning their competence rather than recognizing broader patterns at play. So naming these dynamics allows us to move away from self-blame and toward intentional strategies for maintaining our voice and our presence. Let's move to the next slide. Naming the reality without apology. One of the most important reframes we can make is understanding that navigating perception is not a weakness. This is a leadership skill. So awareness gives us options. It allows us to decide when to adapt, when to push back, and when to hold steady. Being strategic about communication, tone, and timing, it does not mean abandoning authenticity. It means exercising leadership with full awareness of context. When we name these realities out loud, we reduce isolation, we normalize shared experiences, and we create space for growth, both for ourselves and for those that we lead. So strategy is not apology. Strategy is agency. Leadership research increasingly emphasizes the importance of contextual awareness. Understanding organizational dynamics, power structures, and perception is not a weakness. It is a core leadership competency. So as we prepare to go to our next section of this presentation, excuse me, I'd like to invite you to reflect on this question that you'll see on the next slide here. And that question is, what is one perception or expectation you've had to navigate as a leader? We'll give you a few minutes or seconds to answer that question. What's one perception or expectation you've had to navigate as a leader? So I see permissive coming in, okay. Yeah, cold communication style, okay. Too nice, yeah. Okay. Thank you all for sharing those answers, and those continue to roll in. We'll prepare to transition to the next part of our presentation. So now that we've discussed authentic leadership, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about how we can lead during difficult conversations.
Thank you, Tiffany. So I'll be discussing how to navigate difficult conversations when giving feedback. So in addition to what Tiffany has shared and what Lisa will share later, I'll provide strategies and techniques, and we'll practice with a fictional case study. Next slide. So first, communication is key. Who we are and how we communicate, it's going to impact work culture and leadership perception, which is especially true for women in leadership, as Tiffany already shared. One-on-one conversations are going to be a core part of any supervisor's role. Whether you're giving feedback, addressing conflict, or maybe you're making a difficult decision, what we know to be true is that poor or absent communication often leads to conflict, disengagement, and missed opportunities. Whereas strong communication leads to trust, growth, advocacy, and better outcomes. So avoiding difficult conversations, it's going to reduce team trust and performance. And Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety highlights that open communication is critical for team learning and effectiveness. And this is especially true in these difficult conversations. So leaders who communicate openly can foster trust, engagement, and better decision making. So how we handle these conversations really matter for building team culture, which Lisa will touch on more later. Next slide. Now, I'll be the first to say that there are many reasons that these types of conversations feel difficult. So let's break those down. Acknowledging emotions acknowledges the person, and I'm going to expand on emotions a bit more later. There may be conflicting perspectives or values about the topic or situation being discussed. And it's really important to note that because these conversations are frequently initiated by managers, it's important to acknowledge the power dynamic that exists in those rooms. And also understand that conflict does not only arise from the topic that you're discussing, it also arises from how people perceive and interpret events and situations. We bring our whole selves to work, and that impacts the way we interpret what's happening at work. So the challenge in discussion is not just the topic, but our humanity and the human dynamics that surround it. Next slide. So as Tiffany has already noted, women in leadership face additional challenges, and these dynamics can make difficult conversations even more complex. So research describes that double bind that we mentioned earlier, where women are expected to be both assertive and warm. But understand that you can be criticized for either. And this is true when you're initiating these one-on-one conversations. Studies also show that bias and gender bias and stereotypes influence how leadership is perceived, which extends into how we communicate as well. So this creates a very narrow range of acceptable behavior. And in my experience, at least, it's taken greater care, much more emotional labor, and attention on my part and how I show up to and initiate these conversations. Next slide, please. So many leaders, and this is regardless of gender identity, fall into common traps. So we want to make sure we point those out as well. So assumptions automatically are going to shut down constructive dialogue that would lead to further understanding. Focusing on being right rather than understanding the person and perspective also leads to further issues. If you're becoming defensive or aggressive, that's also going to shut down that constructive dialogue. And then last, this is probably the biggest pitfall I see. Avoiding issues and conversations often makes the problem worse, and it can lead to other issues. Being aware of the pitfalls is the first step toward improving how we engage and how we communicate in these specific circumstances. Next slide. So I mentioned that I would circle back to emotions. And the reason is because I've been asked about managing emotions and the emotional labor that goes into these types of situations. And I want everyone to know that emotions are inevitable on both sides of difficult conversations. So as you prepare, pause before reacting. There is no trophy for crossing that finish line first. So take that moment. It could be very crucial. Acknowledge your emotions. And I mean yours, theirs, and everyone's involved. The thing is that human emotions are normal. They're natural. And just because we show up at a workplace doesn't mean that they disappear. We are humans first, and being an employee is secondary. So keep that in mind. Stay focused on the issues and facts. Do not go off on tangents. Now is not the time for idle chit-chat. Save that for another time. And if you can, reframe conflict as an opportunity. This can also help contribute to developing growth mindsets within a team. Next slide, please. So I do want to follow up Tiffany's points on authenticity and also to preface Lisa's discussion on mentoring. And this is all based on our leadership experiences, which include success and failures, because we are also fallible too. So we want to share the following that we've learned. Advocate for others and for yourself. If you never see it or model advocacy, you cannot expect it to show up. So make sure you're doing your due diligence as well. Regularly asking for and receiving feedback helps normalize open communication, and it also reduces intensity of difficult conversations over time. I cannot personally fix or improve what I'm not aware of, so these check-ins help. Asking someone how they prefer to receive constructive criticism at a time when there is not an issue can help you initiate difficult discussions. I've asked this of colleagues over the years, and it has been incredibly helpful when I've had to have difficult conversations, and also just when we have navigated difficult circumstances within our organization. And then last, set clear expectations and boundaries for yourselves and also for others on your team. But it's important to understand how these show up in your organization as a whole. Are they respected? Are they pushed? Are they crossed? That's going to help you be a more effective communicator in the context of that organizational culture. Next slide, please. So today I mentioned that we're going to do a case study, and drawing on research and a TICSA training that I received while doing Title IX work, a few principles guide these techniques. So 1, check your motives before you begin. Create safety in the environment. Stick to facts rather than assumptions, and aim for shared understanding. But then the question is, well, yeah, but how does that actually look in practice? And so here's a list of techniques for that constructive dialogue that you'll be able to apply to the case study in a moment. And the first thing is to prepare with intention. Script the conversation in advance if you have the opportunity. This technique helps clarify purpose before you're in the room. Knowing what you need to learn from the conversation can really help keep you grounded. Lead with curiosity. Frame the issue and ask open-ended questions. You're there to understand their perspective and not just to deliver yours. And this third one might be the hardest for many managers that I've talked to, and that's simply to be quiet and listen. This is a difficult moment for the other person, so give them space and time to really hear what they're saying before you respond. And it's really important to shift from confrontation to collaboration. Instead of saying, you always, maybe try, I've noticed. And if you can, invite them into the solution, asking, how do you think we can address this together? This approach changes the dynamic entirely. And then last, this is also key. Communicate next steps clearly and in writing. Close the conversation with clarity on what happens next and follow up everything you've discussed in writing to ensure accountability on both sides. If you've said you're going to do something as a manager, hold yourself accountable. If they have said they're going to do something, hold them accountable. And that's why it's so important to document that process in writing. Next slide. So because we know challenging conversations are difficult and they can be uncomfortable to start, today we want everyone to practice with this fictional case study. I'm also going to link this in the chat. I'm going to drop it down here. You all will have access to the case study that you see on the screen and also the slide with the techniques that I showed you before. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to read this case study and you all will have an opportunity to respond. The case study says, you are a team leader managing a high priority renovation project at your library. One of your team members consistently delivers strong results and is seen as a top performer by senior level library leadership. They meet deadlines, but they've recently begun interrupting colleagues and dismissing all their ideas in planning meetings. Several team members have privately expressed frustration in their one-on-one meetings with you. They feel hesitant to contribute or voice opposition in meetings, so your task is to address their behavior without damaging motivation or performance, creating defensiveness, or undermining team dynamics further. We want you to take 3 or 4 minutes to respond to this scenario and the questions that Lisa is going to put up on the screen next. We want to know, how would you start the conversation? Or how would success look to you in this situation? And take a moment, check the case study, look at the techniques, and tell us your thoughts. Okay, we have the first sentence starter. I've noticed. It's a good way to frame it. It's grounded in fact. Okay, so someone said that they would start with their success. So addressing, and again, this is an approach to addressing the facts. If somebody is successful and that's been noted and demonstrated, that is a fact. I have something difficult to discuss with you. Okay. Can I ask about? Good. Tell me about your process for. I really, really appreciate that sentence starter because it invites them into the conversation and they get to maybe interpret what is happening in that. You might start with their enthusiasm for the project, ask them how their day is going. It's come to my attention. I've received feedback I want to share. Okay, let's see. We have another example here. Somebody mentions that success would look like gaining an understanding of why the employee has been doing this. I think the why is so crucial. I will say that from experience, whenever I've had to lead difficult discussions and someone's behavior has changed from maybe what it was in the past, 9 times out of 10, what I find out is that they're experiencing something that's not even work related, that's contributing to change in behavior at work. So like addressing the whole person is very essential and crucial whenever you're having these types of conversations. Somebody said they would start by telling them something they're doing well, that they have something to discuss that may be uncomfortable with them. So kind of letting them know what to expect in the discussion can be helpful. And for all of these types of circumstances, it's really important to remember to follow up in writing. When you're delivering information to someone in a difficult or, crucial kind of conversation circumstance, you have to make sure you make it clear what you all discussed and what the next actions are. And plus, it's hard to take in that type of information in the moment. So following it up in writing is also a means of like documenting, making people accountable, but also making it very clear what was discussed, especially if they couldn't take it all in during the discussion. All right, we'll continue to share these responses, and after our presentation is over, we can gather all of these responses and share them with our materials. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Lisa for the last part of our session.
Thanks, Helen. So along with authenticity and communication, mentoring, team building, and morale are at the core of building a strong, resilient workforce. So in this section, I'll highlight how investing in people and shared purpose strengthens performance and long-term success. Mentoring matters in libraries because our work is both people-centered and constantly evolving and changing. Mentorship helps library workers, regardless of their roles, navigate change, build relationships, and grow professionally. Mentoring helps mitigate the impact of all that change. For many of us, we've seen significant staff turnover in the last 5 or 6 years. And all those new people, while they bring new energy into the organization, they need a way to understand the work culture of their new institutions. And mentoring programs, whether you have a formal program or it's just a casual thing where people meet over coffee, mentoring is one great way to secure the sharing of institutional knowledge so that policies and procedures are understood, and also so that things that that are infrequent don't get lost over time. Mentorship also fosters professional growth. Mentors model the leadership that they want to see by offering advice and support to workers who are newer to the field or the institution, and by helping newer librarians see pathways forward, especially in this field where advancement isn't always linear or clear-cut. Mentees benefit. They gain clarity around issues related to the culture of their new institution and the expectations around work. They also have more opportunities to gain or develop work skills that they didn't learn in library school. They have this go-to person or a group of people to ask questions of and seek support from. And having someone you trust that you can go to for support, that also helps to lower stress and anxiety and burnout. Peer mentoring helps people share practical knowledge, which improves workflows and problem solving within and across departments. It breaks down silos and connects people who might not otherwise see each other's work. It creates a situation where colleagues can learn from each other's experience and maybe see one another in a new light. I encourage you to be intentional with team building. So the benefits of working in teams are many. We have shared decision-making that brings more voices forward. It encourages that collaboration across departments. It sparks innovation. It improves morale and engagement because people feel valued and heard. When people see that their work matters beyond themselves, they feel more invested in their work and in the success of the organization. Team building is essential to our success, but it doesn't just happen. It takes time and planning and effort. So how can you as a leader promote and support effective team building practices? You can start by developing and establishing some clear norms and expectations for meetings and work groups. This helps everyone work together more effectively because people have a shared vocabulary. They understand what is going to happen during the meeting, how it's going to be run, what the expectations are. They don't have to wonder, they don't have to guess. Conduct regular check-ins with both individuals and teams to gather feedback and keep work on track. As Helen previously noted, this also helps identify issues early and prevents conflict from escalating into larger problems. Social cohesion really strengthens teams, so it's important to create work-related opportunities for employees to connect. Events such as team lunches, staff retreats, and even taking a field trip somewhere to go see a branch library or something like that can help build relationships, especially among coworkers who may not routinely interact due to the fact that they work in different areas, different offices, and maybe even different buildings. Encouraging collaboration and cross-training really helps break down those silos. It improves service quality, reduces redundancies and misunderstandings. It fosters innovation and supports both individual and organizational success. And then lastly, remember that supporting one another and understanding that what work-life balance looks like for one person may differ from what it looks like for someone else. But that this nonetheless is very important. When we take a people-first approach, we strengthen both teams and the organization as a whole. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. Roll to my next slide. Boosting morale. So here are 3 things to think about in our work when it comes to building morale. We want to acknowledge employee achievement. That validates effort and underscores each person's importance and the importance of their work to the organization as a whole. When we take a moment to recognize someone's achievements, they feel appreciated rather than invisible. And that strengthens their connection to their work and to us and to each other. Recognition also reinforces positive behavior and motivation. So public and timely acknowledgement signals what success looks like and encourages continued high performance. It fosters a culture of respect for work well done. Over time, this creates a more positive work climate as well. Collegial support builds morale by creating a sense of belonging and shared purpose. It encourages colleagues to help one another and to offer encouragement or step in when things are challenging. That helps everyone feel less isolated and more confident because those behaviors demonstrate that each person is part of the team, has value as part of that team, and they're part of a team that cares about everyone's success. And for leaders, supporting initiatives that lead to a healthy work-life balance. I know we've heard it a lot this last couple of days, but things like flexible schedules, reasonable workloads, and a fair distribution of duties increases morale, reduces burnout, stress, absenteeism, and turnover. So to wrap up my section here, I'm going to ask you to think about, gather your thoughts for a moment. I want you to think about this and then choose your own adventure. Building a mentoring relationship. So what is one mentoring relationship that you would like to build, either as a mentee or a mentor? Or you may choose this one, build stronger teams. What is one team building practice you could implement or improve at your institution right away? So you pick which way you want to go with this question. It's totally open to you. And here comes my mentee where we can do that. All right. Okay, good. Encouraging collaboration. Yeah, the silos is a real issue. People start looking and they're like, well, he doesn't do anything. It's like, no, you just don't see all the things he's doing. Yeah. Inclusive, being more inclusive, making sure everybody feels welcome at the table. Everybody feels the value, that their contributions are valued. So important. I love informal lunch gatherings. That is something I really enjoy. Or coffees, check-ins. Yeah. I mean, that kind of peer level is also a great way for people to check in and offer each other help and support. Think about how many times you've met with a coworker and you suddenly realize, oh, we're both doing this thing. We could be doing it together. It's so much easier. It takes some of the stress out of it, right? Some of the anxiety. Informal mentorship model. Yeah, I've had a mentor who has been really helpful, especially when I was new at this institution. She'd been here a long time, and I could just reach out and say, hey, who do I contact? Or where do you do this thing here? Because I was new to this place. And I'm also currently serving as a mentor for someone who's new to the field of education librarianship. So I really enjoyed having both of those. I encourage you to reach out if you've got an idea. And next slide. As we wrap up today, remember that effective leadership isn't about changing who you are. It's about showing up with clarity, confidence, and authenticity. Today, we explored how to navigate perceptions, handle difficult conversations, and build stronger, more supportive teams through mentorship and a people-first approach. We hope you leave us with an understanding that leadership is built one choice at a time, whether it's speaking up more intentionally, approaching a tough conversation with awareness and openness, or investing in someone's professional growth and well-being. We thank you for joining us today, and I'm going to go to our next slide, which is questions for us.
All right. Thank you all so much for the excellent presentation. We do have about 20 minutes for questions. So we've got some already waiting for us in the Q&A, and I'll go in the order of the votes. And then, yeah, if we have some extras left over, we'll be sure to send them to you as well. So first up, from an anonymous attendee, how do you support someone who is experiencing something difficult in their personal life that is contributing to a negative behavior at work? That is, how do you balance being understanding while not letting that bad behavior go?
I can take that one. So I think context matters, and I think it depends on what the behavior is. Obviously, being disrespectful, rude, or aggressive, like we've experienced situations where someone, not here, but we've experienced situations where somebody might lash out physically at a coworker. Well, that behavior is not appropriate no matter what's going on in your life. But we also understand that humans are dynamic. We have a lot of things that are happening. So the first thing, if somebody is experiencing a personal crisis, I think it's important to, one, make sure you have a very good understanding of what your benefits and resources are for students, faculty, whomever you work with in crisis. And so when I've experienced this, a lot of times, like when I've addressed a behavior, I found out that it's not work, it's life. And we also work with a lot of people from a lot of different generations, and the ability to ask for help is hindered by how they were brought up in their work culture. It's like, oh, you're sick, you go to work. You had a death in the family, you go to work. Like, you always go to work, and you are secondary. And so I think that's important as manager. Communicate that. You are primary. As a human, you are the most important part of this discussion. As a human, we know that they have access to resources. So when it's like a health issue, if that's been disclosed, I encourage them to work with HR and to look at options if they need to take leave. A lot of employees, even when I've had an employee who has had a heart attack before, and they're like, well, I just can't take time off work. And I'm like, oh, you absolutely can, and you should prioritize you. So it really depends on the behavior. I think it depends on the circumstance, but making yourself very aware of what mental health resources, what health resources exist. Maybe it's they have to pick their child up every day, but it lands during a meeting when you expect them to take notes, but they can't leave their child at school. They don't have any other structure to support them. Like, you can be flexible, just like Lisa mentioned. So there are ways to help support an employee. Now, if the behavior keeps going on, that's where those regular check-ins are very helpful. So continue to stay connected with them. How is it going? What's happening now? Like, really understand where they are in the process. And I always tell people they don't have to disclose any private or personal information, but if they are in crisis and they need that support, I can connect them with the people on campus that can provide that without sharing any other details. So I think that's really important. You have to be very well versed in what resources are available to employees when they are in crisis. So that's where I would go first, and then see what happens over time. Most cases, that has resolved any of the issues that I've had to deal with, is like providing the support. Because when you support the person, you support the employee, you support the work, you support the outcomes.
I'll just add to that, also trying to address the situation at hand, the behavior or the action that occurred. I've also in a past life been in a situation where someone was angry and threw office supplies, and even though we discussed what the issue was and got to the root of the matter, you still have to talk about, hey, although this is going on in your life, we also just can't be throwing things across the office. So I think after you've addressed what their situation is, like, we also have to talk about that behavior too, and know that that's not okay. Because I do think it kind of not going into what happened, where in my mind, it's like I'm giving a pass to say that was okay. So I want to make sure I also address the behavior too and say, like, even so, whatever's going on in your life, we want to make sure we take care of that. But also, you need to know, like, we can't behave that way in the workplace. And sometimes that's a hard conversation to have too. But I think that's a better conversation to have than, like, having to call campus security or that type of discussion. So.
Yeah, thank you both so much for your reflection on that question. I think that was really helpful, some really concrete suggestions there. And I'll just point out some conversation in the chat about modeling behavior as well. So taking FMLA yourself when you need it. So I think that's thanks to those folks who shared that. Okay, the next question that we have is also from an anonymous attendee. Do you have any insight on applying being a woman leader in the workplace and navigating showing male student workers how to course correct in their biases? I often see male student workers have more pushback against full-time women staff versus their male full-time staff, but they don't seem to understand their unconscious bias and how it attempts to overrule the inherent authority structure of the library. That's a big one.
Yeah, I don't know that I can answer that question fully, clearly, but I do think maybe doing some training, especially because we're talking about a student worker specifically, and addressing that, and maybe just addressing it straightforward. Like I've worked in a classroom where we didn't read the article, but I showed the students an article and I talked about the article and what the article, it was from linguistics. And what we were looking at was how male professors are often professor or doctor and female professors are often Jane. And so and the term is no naming, or they're no named, right? And so either I call them by their first name or I don't call them by a name at all. And then we talked about, well, why is this? And let the students kind of have this moment of starting to reflect and starting to build that in that, oh, maybe this is why this happens in our culture. And so maybe having something like that where you bring something up, but you also you kind of lead the students into that discovery of, I think if you address it really hardline, like what Tiffany was saying, you might get a lot more pushback than if you kind of bring them to the understanding or bring them to this discovery. But I know that takes more time and can be a little more challenging just in terms of time. Not sure if that answered your question or not.
I think that was a really helpful answer to reflect on, helping them learn rather, than potentially having a defensive response. So I think that's a great example. And I think there's someone in the chat as well who is appreciating that. So thank you. That's a tough question. Here's another one. How does intersectionality affect the impression of a leader who is a woman of color or LGBTQ or disabled, for example?
That's a big one. And as a woman of color, I think I'll try to jump in and say personally, I think it's made me more mindful of how I show up to things. Oh goodness, it's a lot to think about. It is, but I think I can start there. It makes me consider how I show up, how I think I'm more likely to hold back. I always say I hold my first reaction um, in meetings and try to like hold my poker face very well because I realize I only get one chance to kind of make a first impression sometimes. Um, so it's an interesting road to trot. Um, yeah, yeah, that's a hard question to come by, but I think the most part is just like trying to be cognizant of how I appear. I think I'm very mindful of that. And even like not even just what I say when I answer a question, but my body language, how I present, maybe even sometimes what I wear. I think a lot about the presentation I'm giving in meetings and what that means for other women of color who may be in my space one day. And like this, however this interaction goes, may cause someone else in this meeting to perceive all women this way or all women of color this way. So it's something that I wish I didn't have to think about as much, but I think about a lot.
That's a lot to carry for sure. Thank you for sharing that, Tiffany.
Mhm.
Hopefully you see the hearts as well that are coming in. Okay. Next, we have a question about agenda setting. So whenever I give people a heads up that I have something to discuss with them, they want me to tell them what it is about ahead of time. Sometimes if it's something very sensitive or hard, I prefer not to put it in writing first or go into details because I can't guide the conversation in advance. How do I handle this? Should I always tell people what I want to talk to them about? I give them a heads up because I want them to block the time off in their schedules. This is a real one.
I can try to answer it, but also know that like I make mistakes too. So I've had this exact same circumstance come up. And if I just have to touch base with somebody about like their status on a project, that's very different, right? Like, hey, can you give me a status update on this? We're going to have a quick one-on-one about it. That's different. When it's a personnel issue, I will let people know that I need to have a meeting with them. I usually schedule those meetings closer to the end of the workday, or I will schedule them on a Friday, especially if it is a very difficult, charged personnel issue. So that way they aren't having a meeting with me at 9 a.m. and then having to go teach a class at 10. So that's something that I do first off with that agenda. I think about circumstance. When are they going to be in the office? When do they leave the office typically? And kind of understand like what their schedule is before I even set the meeting. So that's part of the agenda setting, I believe. And then I let them know that I have a personnel issue that I need to discuss with them and that we will discuss it in a meeting, in a conversation. And that's it. And sometimes people will say, well, what is it about? Can you give me more details? And I follow up and say, we'll discuss it in the meeting. Because there are some things that, out of respect for my colleagues and the people that I'm delivering this news to, I'm not going to put it in writing because one of the things I need to understand is the circumstances. I need to understand perception. I need to understand the situation. And depending on where you work, your conversations and what you put and what you write is part of the written record, and it can be part of a public records request. And so anytime I have a sensitive conversation with an employee, it's a conversation first. And I let them know that it is a personnel issue and that we will discuss it in the meeting. I will get pushback. I just want to know, can you tell me? We will discuss it in the meeting. So I know I sound like a broken record, but I do let them know it's a personnel issue. I do schedule it around their schedule so that if it is something that is difficult, or I always keep tissues in my office because if somebody has a rough day or they're just expressing something or in one of these very difficult conversations, they have that space, they have that place, and then they can leave. Like I always schedule it when they can leave or when they have nothing else for the rest of the day. Like I am very intentional in how I set the meeting. So I think that is as important as setting the agenda.
Awesome. Lisa or Tiffany, any other reflections on this one?
Uh, I'll just add to that. I think this is where we talked about this when the mentoring discussion was up. This is where I think having those check-ins and being close kind of helps give context sometimes when you're setting up those things. I have a team of about 12, mostly female, my team makeup is. So a lot of times I've checked in with them individually once one, and I know kind of how they handle interesting items on the agenda, I guess I would say. So sometimes I have to start with a conversation first. Like, hey, I'm gonna throw something up on the agenda. We're gonna talk about it at our check-in, Tuesday. We'll do it at the end of the day. It is something a little heavier. 'Cause I know I have some that are worry warts. They see something on the agenda, they get really scared, they get really nervous, they get really tense about it, and sometimes it's not a big thing. So I try to preface that with a conversation, maybe a personal one, maybe text, or we'll call and chat or something on the phone. But I think that's helped me to kind of set the stage for like the tone of the conversation and kind of what they can expect. And I also agree with what Helen said about putting things like at the end of the day, trying to be flexible. Like if I know it's going to be something that's going to stress them out all day, I don't put it at the top of the morning on a Monday. So thinking about timing too and trying to be cognizant of what their schedule is. And also if it's something that I think is going to upset them, giving them the space to like have those feelings, and then be able to leave for the day, and then, hopefully start anew the next day.
Yeah, thank you both for those reflections. I think we see some appreciation in the chat, some really good strategies y'all shared. The next question we have is about intergenerational conflict. So, do you have any tips on managing conflict between you and an employee when you are from a younger generation who's managing someone from an older generation?
That's not where I thought it was going to go. I thought it was going to be, ooh, those Gen Xers, they're so this, interesting. I think that is where what Helen was talking about with these very intentional, open conversations. I do think that is the power of having regular meetings or just regular check-in meetings. As I think we've all three kind of said that when you're constantly, not constantly, but when you are talking often and talking shop and also maybe a little bit of social cohesion in there, building in some time, then when those difficult things come up, it's a little bit easier to say, when this happens, it kind of makes me feel like this. And I think that's sometimes my approach is that because for me, it's the opposite. I'm dealing with younger people usually. And so but I try to couch it in the way that it's about I'm just talking about my perception and what I'm experiencing and what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking and just checking in to see if there's a way to work that out. And also just keep moving forward. Like there's no animosity here. It's just when you do this, I feel really uncomfortable. I'm not sure what you're needing from me, or I'm not sure what you're looking for. So I know it's harder, I think, probably to be younger because I just wonder if it's harder. I don't know if that helped answer your question or not. I don't know if somebody else wants to step in, but I do think trying to build those relationships so that you can have those difficult conversations, it goes a long way. It takes time and it's not 100% perfect every time, and you'll have missteps. But I also think being kind of open and authentic. There's nothing wrong with saying to someone like, "Ooh, I'm sorry, I misspoke. I said that thing and it was totally wrong, and I apologize." And how can we move forward? How can we move forward from here?
Yeah, I'll just follow up with what Lisa was saying. My in my past life, I supervised people who were older than me, and not just older than me, but I had been at that institution for 20 years, people who had watched me kind of grow up in the library system. So it was interesting at first. It took some adjusting, and I honestly felt really nervous about managing them because they had been in the library so long, they had so much experience, so much seniority, and they're people who I had at one time looked up to. So one of the things that I did when I started was just tried to have those regular check-in meetings. Those were really important because I think it opened the door for us to have conversations. And I didn't want them to see me as like, the kid who would push the book cart around for 20 years ago or whatever. I wanted them to see me as not just their manager and leader, but someone they could talk to and someone who would be supportive of them. So like some of my first year of us working together was me just reinforcing like, I'm here to support you. We are a team. We're a small department, but we're a team. I'm here for you. You can share with me what you're going through. And I think we grew a lot in that first year together. And I think they saw me differently. And I think I saw them less as like my older colleagues and just colleagues, people that I worked with. So it was very helpful to have those check-ins, to have that time. And we had difficult conversations. We had some bumps in the road, and I didn't do everything right either. And I was not afraid to say to them, like, I'm learning, we're learning together. So there may be places where I mess up, and I'm happy to pivot and correct that and admit my mistake. And I think I just was able to show humility in leadership, and not as if I'm coming in, I have all the answers, I just graduated, I know everything, and you all are behind. I didn't present that at all. I tried to just show them like I really value what you bring to the table as much as what I have. And I think we have both things to learn from each other. And I think that just it helped in those years where I did supervise them, it helped make that time a lot easier.
Well, thank you both for that reflection. I think we have time for maybe one more question, so I'm going to ask a follow-up on the one we just had. So I guess I'll just say I personally agree that those regular check-ins are so important for establishing that relationship so you can have those difficult conversations. But what if this person asks, someone is resistant to regular check-ins?
I can take that. I've experienced that before. And I think a lot of that speaks to the culture of the organization. So if that wasn't part of the culture before, and that's part of your management style, is to connect with your employees and and know what type of work they're doing. I've had people who are like, no, I don't need to check in. And so at that point, I'm like, well, this is a function of our roles and the way that I can best advocate for you and the way that I can highlight the work that you do in service of the mission of this organization is predicated upon these types of discussions. So I have regular check-ins with our AD, and Lisa and Tiffany do as well. We all have the same boss, and we all do regular check-ins with our boss. And a lot of times what I'm doing in those meetings is I'm highlighting what my team is doing. And in a really large organization, the ability to recognize and be seen can be very difficult. This is also true. I've worked in really small libraries as well. Like, if you are doing great things, but you're the only one who knows, like, I want you to share that. I want you to share that with me so that I can highlight the work that you do. Because so often I think people do a lot of labor, a lot of work, they invest a lot of time, but they don't get that recognition. And so having regular check-ins isn't just about like, oh, this is, like all difficult stuff. Like we approach it as like help and highlights. What are the highlights you want to share? Brag on yourself. I'm telling you, be self-centered. This is your time. So tell me about yourself. Tell me what's going on. What is something you need help with? What is something you need more support in order to get across that finish line? So I think that's important, is to frame the why, like why we're doing these check-ins isn't just to deliver bad news. It's to understand who they are, how they work, how to best support them, and also how to shout at the rooftops of the work that they are doing. Because that impacts like advancement, it impacts pay, it impacts so many things in these large like systems that we work in.
I love that help and highlights framing. That's pretty cool. Might have to steal that myself. Tiffany, Helen, and Lisa, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your experiences and thoughts. Great presentation. Attendees, if you all will give them some feedback when you close out this Zoom window, that little feedback survey will pop up, or it's also in the Sched. We do have one more concurrent session today before we get to our closing keynote. So hope to see you all there and hope you enjoy the last day of Calm here. And presenters, thanks again for being with us.
Thank you.